Welcome to Not Another CEO podcast. I'm your host, David Politis. Every week, we talk to inspiring leaders and get the true stories, the ups and downs, the lessons learned, and come away with actionable advice for our own journeys. Today's guest has revolutionized the commercial real estate industry over the last 15 years. He is probably the most resilient founder CEO I've ever met. He's faced a lot of challenges while building his company and not only survived, but is thriving. He's been recognized on numerous best entrepreneurs lists. His company has been recognized as a best place to work by Inc., Fortune, and others. His company designs and operates meeting, event, and flexible office spaces. They now have almost 40 locations across 9 cities in 2 countries. Please welcome co-founder and CEO at Convene, Ryan Simonetti. Hey, Ryan.
Hey, David, how are you? Great to be on.
Great. I'm excited. Let's jump into it. First question. What's the one thing you've done at Convene, big or small, that's had the biggest impact and that you'll absolutely do again if you're CEO of another company in the future?
It's a great question. And I'd have to go way back. I think it was, we started the company in 2009, and we had started to get to a size and scale where we had to start to write down vision, mission, values, where we couldn't just kind of lead from the front and have it happen. I'd say it was probably 2011. And my co-founder and I, were committed to putting this stuff on paper. And I think I pulled an all-nighter and I wrote down our core values. And the acronym is GRIT, which I think stands for a lot in and of itself. And I know we'll talk a little bit about the experience kind of navigating Convene through the pandemic, which is really an existential crisis for us. But GRIT is genuine, relentless, integrity, teamwork. And at the same time, we also wrote this kind of philosophy, which to me is really a life philosophy of 1% better each day. And that's this constant improvement, almost Kaizen type mindset that, I think my co-founder and I had as humans, and really wanted to bring that to an organization. And I'd say of the many important things I feel like we've done, as a team and as an organization, committing to writing those values down on paper was probably one of the most, I'd say, transformational and really an inflection point. And, if I look at the business today and the success that we've had, I would say it's been staying religiously true to that core value system in everything that we do, from the way that we hire to the way that we engage with our clients, to how we interact with our partners, to how we deal with challenging situations, which, for any startup founder and CEO or management team scaling a business, those things always happen. And so I'd say that of it all, that would be, I'd say, probably the most important thing that, we and I did.
I have so many questions on this. You've kept the same values for over a decade. Have you ever felt the need to change it, or kind of thinking like, hey, they don't really represent who we are now that I think you're 1,000 people maybe today?
Yeah, just under 1,000 people.
So like, have you ever thought about changing them, or that just this has been?
No, I would say our mission statement, our vision statement, our principles, I think like most companies, as you evolve and the market evolves and the opportunity set evolves, I think you're always tweaking that. I think as a founder, you have a vision. I call it like the front of the puzzle box. And I think you have a vision of what is possible and where you want to go, but it gets clearer as you get close to the destination. And then you also find these amazing new destinations that you want to go to. So I would say we've rewritten like our mission and vision statement, I don't know how many times over the last 15 years. We've definitely rewritten the about us convene section of our website and boilerplate and LinkedIn, I don't know how many times. But thankfully, the core values is something that, we've never had to go back and really revisit. And I think it says a lot, like, genuine. Like, what does that mean? Well, that means to be authentic. That means to be authentic as a brand, authentic as a business. It means to be authentic as individuals, especially, in the hospitality business. I've always been a huge fan of Danny Meyer, and, I read his book, Setting the Table, early on. And it was really clear to me that the ethos and philosophy of Union Square's approach to hospitality was, let's hire amazing people that are compassionate, that care, and let's let them bring their genuine, authentic selves to deliver that experience. Like, let's not put them in a set uniform, and let's not give them the Ritz-Carlton script that they need to say. Like, and so I think this idea of genuine and authenticity is something that, I think has served us well. Relentless. Like, David, as a founder and CEO, so much of success is like, don't give up, don't quit, keep pushing, right? And, it's been amazing for me to see. And, I think we all got spoiled for a very long period of time, especially in the startup ecosystem. Easy to raise money, easy to get a customer to pilot with you, easy to go get $1 of revenue. And I think any founder and CEO you talk to today knows that that's not the world we live in anymore. And I think all of us, we got tested in the pandemic in a certain way, but I think every founder today, especially those that are out, trying to fundraise, like, there's a certain tenacity and resilience that is now required, because it is not easy. And so I think this idea of being resilient has definitely served us well. Integrity, like, do the right thing, period. And, I think especially in the industry that I'm in, real estate, finance, it's easy to cut corners and to maybe tell yourself that you're doing the right thing, but you're really angling. And for us, we always wanted to be open, honest, transparent, fair, and, be able to put our head on the pillow at night, not just as individuals and leaders, but as a business. And then lastly, I grew up playing a lot of team sports, and business is the greatest team sport in the world, especially in a hospitality company. Every single person in this organization, whether you're in the corporate office, senior management, or you're working in one of our kitchens, the experience that we're delivering to our clients, you cannot do alone. And I'd say that element of teamwork and this idea of, like, we win and we lose together, I think has really served us well. And, is one of the reasons that, I think we were able to navigate ourselves through, an existential event in the pandemic, and not just survive, but come out thriving. Our business, we were killing it before the pandemic, in the process of closing a pre-IPO equity round, profitable, metrics were incredible. And, we're a bigger business today than we were heading into the pandemic. And, I think, again, that's a testament to the team staying true to who we were, these core values, and being very, very relentless and resilient.
So the values are, like you just went through, I mean, timeless, especially for your kind of business. So it makes sense. You've kept them in place over a decade. Now the next question is, how do you interview for those values? Do you have a dedicated team that does values interviews? I've heard that. Do you, from other people, is it just in the interview, in the, wherever they have to put the feedback and it's got each value? Like, how do you interview for these values?
every organization I think has what they would define as like their high bar when bringing talent into their organization. And if I was interviewing at Google, it's going to be probably very driven around like my technical capability, right? As an engineering culture, the technical capability is going to be really, really important, right? Because as an organization, that's like one of their core competencies and differentiators. For Convene, as like a hospitality company, we're in the human to human delivery of service experience business. We're in the people business. And so, as part of our interview process, um, we've built our questions. And when our interviewers are filling out their post interview feedback, there's certain questions that they're asking, and they actually do like a grit score of each individual candidate. And one of the questions that, and I ask this question in every interview that I do, especially of senior leaders, but really anytime I get to interview anyone, and it's an open ended question, but I think it says a lot about a person, which is what is the most challenging thing you've had to go through in your life? And how has that shaped who you are, what you believe, and what you want to accomplish in your life? And the responses I've gotten in that question says a lot. My mom died when I was a kid. I had cancer. Like you name it, you get it. And I think you learn a lot about who a person is as a human in the response to that question. And also how uh, self-actualized and reflective are they? And to me, it also says like grit, resiliency, adaptability, and that's one of my favorite interview questions.
I like that. I like that a lot. I like that a lot. That's a really good question because you do learn a lot about you. You probably learn a lot about their drive. What is it that's
100%, especially in a startup environment, right? A high growth company. We always try, and I was our former chief people officer and COO, who is amazing, Amy Poozer. When she came, she said, "Look, we have to hire for growth company DNA." And I'm like, "Well, what is growth company DNA?" Well, she said, "Well, think about it. In a growth company, you're always writing the playbook. You don't inherit a playbook. You're writing a playbook. You're constantly calling audibles. And there's a difference between people that run playbooks and build playbooks. And in a growth company, in a startup company, it's not black and white, it's always gray. And having people that are adaptable, resilient, curious, self reliant, don't need to be told what to do, see a problem, try and come up with a solution, that's kind of what you need in those environments to be successful, because those environments require that type of mindset and skill set. And so not only are we looking for grit and those core values, but also a person that is comfortable living in some sort of ambiguity and in what I would say is kind of a constant state of change. And look, as humans, we don't really love change, but in a startup high growth environment, that's all you're dealing with every day. And I think we've gotten really good through the recruiting process and the way we've built our employee facing brand and our employer brand, as well as in the interview process of really starting to not just attract and retain those types of people, but also understanding kind of how to structure the interview process to make sure, um, let's say our hit ratio is higher and we're making good hiring decisions.
so one thing I've done events myself through my companies. I've done a number of events at Convene spaces, and then I've attended events at a number of Convene spaces. And one of the things that I noticed, and when you and I talked, I told you this, like the quality is it's very consistent. I mean, you basically feel like you almost, other than the views that you have and the you know that you're in a convened space, and you get from the people who work there to the food to I mean, it's pretty consistent. Um, how hard has it always been that way? How hard is it to actually maintain that? Like, I'm very curious about this. We haven't actually talked about this part. Like, how do you actually do that?
So, one, I would say thank you. As as somebody that is in the hospitality business, and I'll speak for all of us that have a similar seat than I do. The greatest compliment anyone can give you is consistency. Think about that. You know how hard it is for us? Like we have what, 37 locations, about to be 40. We're operating in 2 countries, 9 different cities. But yet 50% of our revenue comes from really global Fortune 500 companies that are using us everywhere. And when you think about why would I, as a Fortune 500 company, trust a brand? Well, one of the things about trusting a brand is, are they going to deliver consistency to me at scale? Whether I'm in New York or San Francisco or Washington, D.C. or London, whether it's a C-level meeting or a small executive offsite or a training, am I going to get a consistent, high-level, high-quality experience? And I would say it is the single hardest thing to do in the hospitality business, right? And I think thankfully, one, because of the people, two, I would say a relentless focus on improvement and a commitment to training against certain standards. I think we've done a great job of creating and delivering that consistency at scale over many, many, many years. And look, I think there's other brands that are great examples, and there's definitely businesses that I and we have studied. One of my favorites is Hillstone, Houston's. Like, I've never had a bad meal at Hillstone, ever. Okay. And like, I always am blown away when I go to a Hillstone in a different city or, at some different random mall. And I'm like, oh my God, like
So true.
it's the same. It's the service, the quality of the food. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And again, I wish I could say it's one thing. It's not. I think it's everything that we do.
Has it always been this way?
No, no. And look, as a global hospitality company, we now operate multiple brands too. And so not only are we having to deliver, I would say, kind of Convene consistency at like the platform level. So whether you go to Convene or ETC Venues, which is one of our brands in London, or we have this whole white label kind of almost autograph collection signature venues with Convene. Not only do we have to create consistency here, but now within each of those respective brands, we need to create consistency, which is hard. So I would say it's something we obsess over and talk about often. It hasn't always been that way. We do it better today than we did a month ago. We do it better today than we did a year ago. And I know we'll do it better a year from now than we do today, just because we're so obsessed over that.
Actually, the different brands. I realized because you acquired, I think, the one in London, right?
Yeah.
Does each one have its own? I guess each one has its own twist to it. I mean, otherwise they'd all be the same brand.
Yep.
And do they have different people setting that? You know what like? How do you do that?
Yeah. So our thesis is that, if you kind of look at the world that we play in, which is this, bringing hospitality to meetings, to work. We've got our core kind of meeting, event, and conferencing business. We're also in the high-end co-working and membership business and flexible workspace business. We believe our industry, like the hotel industry, will have a couple large global platforms that operate multiple brands and products that speak to the unique needs of the client base. And that could be a unique product need. It could also be a budget or price point. So for example, we've got some big global Fortune 500 companies, and depending on if it's a client-facing event versus an internal executive event versus a internal training versus a town hall, different product need and different budget. And so to some extent, we're building brands that speak to the different needs of our customers, but also the different budgetary constraints of our customers. There's a reason why Hilton, Marriott, Hyatt have 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, boutique, extended stay. And we see that same sort of opportunity to execute a similar strategy within our industry.
So you could basically have like executive briefing center almost experience versus a team huddle, team meeting.
Yeah, or just small meeting versus big meeting. Yeah. Or special event versus a corporate conference, for example. And if you look across our portfolio, there's a tremendous amount of consistency. There's a Lego set element to what we do, but different locations and the different brands are speaking to a different need of the client.
So you've mentioned a couple times, obviously COVID was a really, really, the stories you've told me are, I mean, really truly unbelievable to now see where you are. Can you talk about what is the biggest challenge you faced at Convene, which was this COVID period? Can you talk a little bit about that, and how did you come through on the other side of that, and maybe give some detail to that?
Yeah, definitely. And look, every founder founder out there, I know for sure, founding team, and anyone that's kind of been in the startup to high growth, everyone has had their near death experiences. You're walking a gauntlet, and you're always tinkering on survival and death, especially as an early stage company. And we went through that. I'd say the difference there is that you still feel like you can control the outcome. You have some control. The thing with the pandemic for us, and to give you some sense of where we were, and I'll take you to February of 2020. February of 2020, we had just finished our board meeting. We were up to 34 locations. We had 1 million square feet under development, including expanding into London. Financially, the business was performing incredibly well, over 200 million in revenue, profitable, wind at our sails. We had kind of navigated the WeWork mess from a brand perspective where I think the market and our clients and landlord partners knew that we were a different business. We were a hospitality business, not a co-working business. And, we're in the middle of closing a large pre-IPO equity round, which would have, one, provided liquidity to a lot of our existing investors, which, people were very excited about. And it would have put $200 million of cash on our balance sheet and positioned us to be, the clear winner in our category. And we walk out of that board meeting high-fiving, second week of February. And in less than 3 weeks later, we had shut down every location. We went from 1,000 employees to less than 100 between layoff and furlough. We had stopped paying all of our landlords and our lender. And the pre-IPO deal was gone. And we had enough cash, but not enough cash to navigate through revenues going from 220 million to zero for 2 years. So literally, we pretty much mothballed the company for almost 2 years. And then had to pretty much take the company through almost like an out-of-court restructuring of the entire business. And somehow, I would say, resilience, grit, but a shit ton of luck too. And we were able to kind of navigate our way through and, recap the business in 2022 with Aries and Hudson Bay Company. And, thankfully, the world reopened and companies came back to meeting and needed places to work. But it was 2 years of I would say a constant existential crisis. And, the hardest part for me, especially when you're a company that is committed so much and cares so much about your people, your culture, your values, um, the human side of this, knowing that, you have all of these people, 1,000 people that are dependent on you to pay their bills, take care of their families, um, and to kind of have to make the decisions we had to make as an executive team quickly to survive. It was traumatic, and we did everything we could. Our executive team, we donated our salaries to an employee relief fund. We had employees writing letters in to apply to this relief fund. And I remember, my family and I were all together, and like so many of us were, and I would read these letters to my family after dinner, and everybody would be crying, like bawling. And, it's that for me as like a founder and CEO that like I take with me in that experience. And now coming out of it, doing everything I can to make sure, we diversify our business. If the next black swan event happens, that we're never in a position again where we have to make the decisions we made to survive. Because not something I think and I know for a fact the team would ever want to have to go through again.
Was there any period of time in those 2 years that you thought the company would not exist at all?
Think about this. 90% of our revenue went to zero for 2 years. We went from 200 plus million in revenue, about to be 300, to 20 something million in revenue for 2 full years. What business can survive a 90% revenue decline for 2 full years? So I would say, did I question? Were there moments where I'm like, there's just no way we're going to be able to figure our way out of this? And, one of the things I learned was that the minute you lose hope, the minute you give up optimism, the minute you resign yourself to defeat, you know what happens? It's over. And, there was many a day and night of self-talk about just, we don't lose faith. And if you just one foot in front of the other, same way we built this business, brick by brick, day by day, 1% better day, if you can just keep that mindset and keep the team inspired, which, man, was hard to do. I knew at some point it would have to end. And if we could just survive long enough, that I knew we were so well positioned. Like, I knew the world was coming to us before, and then coming out of the pandemic, hybrid work, flexible work, companies optimizing their real estate, everyone shifting towards experiences. Like, I knew if we could just get to the other side, cross the chasm, survive, I knew the business was going to crush it. And, thankfully, we were able to kind of maintain that hope and optimism, and we survived long enough to be where we are today, which is, like I said, bigger, better, faster, stronger, we'll in dollars and profit. But yeah, it was a heck of a ride. And there was definitely some dark moments where I didn't know if we were going to make it.
What percent of the exec team that you had back then is still in seat today?
For the most part, I'd say, new executive team. I've always been a big believer in promoting from within. It's one of the things we've always done as a company. I like build a farm system, right? If you look at like the best sports teams, especially within baseball, it's about your farm system. And so I think we as a company always did a great job. It's like hire really smart, young, hungry people, give them the opportunity to learn and grow, put them in leadership positions probably before they're ready. And maybe some of this was that me as a young founder and CEO, where, I remember when I first started the company, my partner and I, we'd set up meetings with people, and I mean, they pretty much laugh us out of the room. Like, who are these 26-year-old kids coming? Like, I'll give you 15 minutes. And then the meeting would last an hour and we'd get a deal done and whatever. But I think that I always felt that age in both directions should not be a governor or a restrictor on what you can do. And, part of what I did kind of coming out of the pandemic is I ended up promoting a lot of really young, talented people that have been growing into leadership roles into like real senior executive roles over the last like 18 to 24 months. And, it's people that know the business, know our clients, and, I'd say top to bottom, this is probably the best team that we've had. And, they're doing an amazing job kicking butt. And I think it's a huge part of the reason why we're in the position we're in today and have the opportunity set that we have in front of us.
It's interesting because I think there is an element of being biased when have been through it yourself as a young entrepreneur or a young CEO or leader. And when people don't believe in you, then you kind of feel over time like you need to give people that. I mean, I had the exact same experience. I was like 22, 23, CEO of this company, Vocalocity. I will never forget the meeting in a conference room with a partner. And I thought this partner was going to be so important. They probably would have generated a couple $100,000 a year. So like in the grand scheme of things, not that important. And this person was sitting across from me and she said to me, I don't think we can do business with a company that has a 23-year-old CEO in like the telecom. Like this is like, and I'll never forget that meeting. And it drove me for years actually just to prove that we're going to get this business to be the big. You wish you could partner with this business, but then as you get later on in your career, you start to say to yourself, why can't that person, because of the age, to your point, in either direction, but you say like, why can't that person punch above their weight and get to, maybe it's not everyone, but when you find those people, it's like magic, really, because you're giving them that opportunity to punch above their weight, to leapfrog in terms of their career. So I'm like 100% on board with that approach, but it takes a lot of takes guts to actually bring those people up and make that your executive team, your senior leaders.
Yeah. And also, and like, David, I don't know what your experience has been, but look, we could probably do a whole separate podcast on hiring. I still think hiring is the hardest thing. And even if you're world class, you're probably only batting like 400, right? And I've personally really, really struggled for whatever reason. And maybe it's on me and I'm not a great interviewer, but I've always really struggled bringing folks in from the outside that had senior positions and kind of parachuting them in at an executive level. For whatever reason, it's just tended not to work out that well for us. Whereas when I've groomed, farm system, promoted, and kind of grown from within, like those team members have gone on to like absolutely crush it. And so now I'm like, is my bias over rotating to that versus the fact that we can bring really talented folks in from the outside? And I'm not saying we haven't. If you look at our executive team today, well, we've brought some incredibly impressive folks in, from outside the business over the last couple of years as well. But, I've just found better success, kind of grooming talent from within the organization.
You know what you're getting. You know what you're getting. I agree with you. I probably bet on exec hires probably 40%, and when you think about it, you think you are, you think you are, and you've hired a lot of them, and so you think you should be better than 40%. But actually, in the podcast, the interviews I've done, and CEOs that have had 5 companies and have sold all of them for hundreds of millions, they're saying 50%, 40%. No one says 70, 80. I haven't heard a single person say a number over 60%.
And look, I think there's lots of reasons for that. And look, we do Hogan's, we do assessments. You interview with my executive coach. I mean, like we've tried to build a framework and a program to increase the probability of success. And I definitely think that those things have helped. But You don't know until someone's working in the organization, assimilated into the culture. So much of the success as a leader and an executive is not vertical. It's the ability to move and influence horizontally, which is different interpersonal dynamics, et cetera, et cetera. And so the problem is like you don't know until you know. And that means somebody has to be here. I don't even think 90 days is enough. It's really like 6, 9, 12 months before you really know if an outside senior hire is going to have the impact that you had hoped or expected when bringing them in.
So one of the things that you definitely dealt with, given the dynamics of the business through the pandemic and everything else, you've had a lot of investors involved in this business. And I'm pretty sure at one point you had maybe 9, 10 board members, if I'm not mistaken.
10-person board.
10-person board. How do you deal? Like, why, how, what? Because 10-person board, I can't even, I honestly can't even contemplate what a board meeting.
Life is about experience and learning from mistakes. So I will blame a lot of this on ignorance or just not knowing at the time. So, you got to realize when we started Convene, there was no prop tech. There was no venture funding for especially like a tech-enabled brick and mortar business. Definitely not in the middle of 2008 and 9, like global financial crisis. Wait, you want to start a new business in real estate in the middle of a financial crisis? Like that's a novel concept that nobody's done before. Like get out of here. And I mean, I don't know how many investor meetings I had taken and it was no, 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 no. And then finally, the universe did us a solid and we ended up getting a small New York-based family office to kind of back us, but they weren't even investing in the company. They were investing in a single location. They wanted nothing to do with the business. They were like, we will pretty much finance this box and we want the cash flow from this box. That's what we're underwriting. And long story short, through different iterations, that then became a corporate investment. And, we didn't do our first real institutional round of financing until 2011 or 2012. So like 3 years of kind of pure bootstrapping. And then obviously 2012, business is taking off. WeWork is also, thank you to them, had started to create a wake that we could kind of ride behind. What do they say? High tide rises all ships. And then obviously through multiple rounds of financing, A, B, C, D, we had raised a ton of capital and a lot of institutional capital, including from strategic investors, including big global landlords that owned a lot of Class A trophy assets around the world. Because, like a hotel company, we really have 2 core stakeholders. We have the clients that we serve and deliver experiences to. And then we have the developers, owners, and operators of real estate that we're partnering with to create value in their real estate. And so the idea of having a Brookfield as an investor or an RXR as an investor in our business made a lot of sense because to some extent you were solving the supply side of your distribution, if you want to think about it that way. And so, yes, through all these different rounds, the lead investor kept saying, oh, but I get a board seat. Well, after so many rounds, you know what an investor doesn't want to do in the next round is give up the board seat that they have. And so instead of structuring it where if a new round happens and you don't do your pro rata or you don't own a certain percentage, like we get your board seat back. Next thing you know, I'm running like a public company board in a high growth, like mid-market private company. And look, it was great. I learned a lot in how to manage different dynamics and build consensus. And it'll serve me well someday if and when I ever run a public company board. But the challenge with that, I'd say, was when it hit the fan in the pandemic, and you have different investors, including strategics, with different duration, different perspectives, what's important to them, and a 10-person board, making the hard decisions becomes impossible. And so what went from a good situation because the business was performing great, and I hate to say it, but as a founder CEO, the more people in the room, technically sometimes the more control you actually have because you can sway. When it became a crisis and really tough decisions needed to be made, it was almost impossible to get any consensus on what to do. And, I'd say my recommendation to, smaller companies or startup companies or high growth businesses, try and keep that board smaller and more manageable, because good things happen, bad things happen. But when you need to make decisions quickly and decisively, the more people in the room, the harder it is to make the call and get consensus. And now, look, we're in a very different situation. Ares, the large asset manager, they now own 70% of the business. Control, kind of private equity investor, very different experience than the venture stuff I had done in the past. And honestly, it's been a breath of fresh air, getting things done, getting to yes, getting to no, allocating capital, doing M&A, all the things that we kind of need to do now to take us to the next level. It's a lot easier when you only have to go to one person.
Yeah, the interesting thing, I think that the advice I got as time went on about my investors and my board was, you want to make sure you're keeping them updated. You don't want to show up at a board meeting with a bunch of surprises. You want to, when you're doing the annual plan, you want to make sure you socialize. But when you have 10, it's actually becomes almost a full time. If you want to do it that way, that's basically a full time job.
And you have to do it that way, right? One of my things was I would, even though we had a 10-person board, I was always engaged in talking to the 10 people. I never just talked to them before a board meeting or at a board meeting. I made sure that they were an active participant. I would make them thought partners in the things that I was thinking about strategically, because I knew if we didn't do that and showed up at a board meeting, how are we ever going to get to an answer, let alone the right answer? And then before every board meeting, I would have a call or meeting with each individual board member. Then you'd have the board meeting, and then I would do an individual follow-up with each member. So I did a before board meeting post, and I think that was one of the reasons why, even within the pandemic, we're at least able to get to the right outcome. But it's like, to your point, that's a full-time job.
It's one of the pieces of advice I've actually heard now so many stories from people who do it this way, I think the right way, you're saying the right way. When they end up in bad situations, they end up in a much better place than in an alternate universe if they were just showing up to board meetings, giving me it's a personal, right? As much as it's a fund and it's a personal relationship of someone saying,
look, everything's a trust trade. It's a trust trade. If I'm investing in your company, I'm investing in your company, yes, because I believe in the product. Yes, because I think the market opportunity. Yes, I've done my diligence, but ultimately it's because I trust you. And part of my trust in you is, can you manage my expectations up or down? But please just don't surprise me. I tell my leadership team this all the time. Just don't surprise me. And I think so much of life is about showing up, and so much of life and relationships is about managing expectations, right? You said you were going to do this. Did you do this? You said you were going to do this, but if you can't do this, can you let me know you can't do this? And then let me know if you are going to do this. And I think it's these basic things that we can make them more complicated than they are, but I think are relatively, kind of basic things that all of us in any of our relationships, or at least healthy ones, expect. And I think it's easy as a founder CEO to get a little bit lost in, whether it's your own ego or your own time, and not commit the energy to do those things, or you're afraid to deliver bad news, which lots of people are. I get it. But I've always found that, radical transparency, radical candor, um, saying things the way they are and being open and honest about my opinion, whether people agree or disagree. I think anyone you talk to that's worked with me, invested with me, you know where I stand. And I think there's something to be said, especially in management team, investor or founder, investor dynamics, where they need to know where you stand. And they also need to know when expectations aren't going to be met and why.
So you mentioned, I actually feel like for your business, from what I'm hearing from CEOs, from what I'm hearing from people, actually young people who have never gone into an office because they graduated during the pandemic and everything else, people want to be together. People want to spend time together. People want to be in space together, do events. What are you most excited about for the future of Convene?
Well, I'd say you just said it right there. Like, what is convenient? We're in the bringing people together business, whether it's a great meeting or event experience, or as your team in your office. We're in the business of bringing people together around experiences. And if I take a step back, macro, we have lots of what I would call kind of structural tailwinds behind the business. The first is we are in an experience economy, and it's not just for consumers, it's also for businesses. So this flight to quality, flight to experience, is something that I believe is structural. And we, as a company delivering experiences as a premium kind of lifestyle brand, are no doubt getting the benefit of that. And we're seeing that, taking market share from some of our competitors. We're seeing that on the landlord side of our business, where landlords, especially of these high quality assets, want to work with the best providers and deliver premium. So not only are we seeing it on the demand side of our business, but also on the supply side. I'd say the second thing is, whether you're remote first, you're hybrid first, or you're in office, you want to be in a great space when you come together. Whether it's every day, 3 days a week, or 5 days a week, you want to be in a great space. You want to have a great experience. You need to meet and gather as a team and with your clients in an intentional way, right? Oftentimes with an experience, whether it's food, a conference, an activity, and we just don't see that going away. If anything, the more hybrid and flexible organizations are, the more you physically actually need to come together to meet as a team to maintain culture, strategy, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, all of us that run businesses know, even if you're running remote first, you still need to bring your team together a few times a year to maintain relationships, culture, trust, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'd say the last thing, which is really important for us, and people don't really think about us this way, but we're an outsourcing business. Our biggest competitor is companies doing it internally on their own. Like, when we lose business, and this has been true for 15 years, yes, do we lose business to the Four Seasons or the Mondrian or the Marriott Marquis or WeWork or Industrious? Like, yeah, we do. But really, we lose business to meeting or event held in-house, where these big Fortune 500 companies built their own internal, relatively speaking, convenes in their own footprint that they manage and spend money on, which, by the way, makes no sense, because they never utilize it enough to justify that. Or I ended up signing my own lease with a landlord, and I'm going to build out my own space. I'm going to sign a 5 or 7 or 10-year lease with a landlord, and I'm going to kind of like manage my own office experience. And I think what we're finding is that most organizations, I think, understanding that their workplace experience strategy is now integrated into their business strategy and their cultural strategy. They know how important that is. And they also know it's not cheap to do. It's its own kind of capability. And we're just seeing more and more companies want to outsource that stuff. For us, we are a huge beneficiary of that shift towards outsourcing. I think that that's a huge structural kind of shift in behavior, where big companies in particular, I would say are now kind of committed as part of their strategy to outsourcing more and more of the workplace experience, the meeting experience out of their own footprint to companies like us.
Let's transition a little bit now to your background. Where are you from originally?
So I grew up in central New Jersey, Hillsborough. My wife also grew up in New Jersey, but she'd say I grew up in the real New Jersey. She grew up in Bergen County. My dad, who's had a big, huge influence on my life, and I mentioned him often in podcasts and stuff, was an entrepreneur. I think anyone that has been to New Jersey or has been to Rutgers, New Jersey, and there's this like famous thing called the grease trucks at Rutgers, where like the bars pour out and there's these food trucks that make all this stuff. My dad was like had an OG side hustle, and when I was a kid, after his day job was done, he was like hustling a food truck on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights at Rutgers University. So my dad's always been an entrepreneur. When I was 8 years old, he bought a small business, which he still owns to this day, which was a bread delivery business. I don't know if you've ever had a Shake Shack burger, but that bun is called a Martin potato roll. And, my dad owned one of the first kind of delivery and routes and territories for them. So as a young kid, I was getting up very early in the mornings in the summers. The bread business is like a 3 a.m. wake up business. And, I'd go with him and kind of service these stores. So I've been kind of in and around the food business and the hospitality business since I was a young kid. Played a lot of sports competitively growing up and, was fortunate enough, not for sports, but academically to get into Villanova University. And, from there, it kind of set me on the path of Lehman Brothers, real estate, banking and structured products, to a real estate investment company that was a startup I grew really quickly called Gramercy Capital. And then all of that stuff kind of navigated me to start and convene.
Did you always know you wanted to, like growing up around your father, did you always know you were going to be an entrepreneur?
Oh yeah, I was. My dad would say, I was always a hustler. You know, and always scheming with him on like, how does he scale his business? I mean, he would say like, even when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, I'd be like, Dad, let's buy the other route next to you and let's get 2
You
trucks
you would
on the
say?
road. Yeah, I would say that to him. And so I would just say I've always been very business minded. Obviously I think entrepreneurship is nature and nurture. And, obviously, with my dad as kind of a role model and a huge figure in my life, I always knew I was going to do something on my own. I had no idea what it would be, but I also knew whatever I did, I wanted it to be big. I think in scale, I always have. I would say I'm a serial entrepreneur, but I'm probably less of a 0 to 1 guy and more of a 1 to as big as I can get it guy. And I've always, I would say, been more of like a scale oriented leader and thinker. And what's fun about, Convene now is like we're playing a different game. We're hundreds of millions in revenue, real EBITDA, free cash flow, big private equity backing. Convene's really now kind of playing the scale game, which is a little different. And, I'd say both from a skill set perspective, but also intellectually, I'm having a ton of fun with the stage and phase that the business is in today.
What does your dad think of what you've built?
Look, my parents didn't go to college. We grew up with a, kind of a modest upbringing. No one actually, I think I'm the first person in either side of the family to go to a 4-year college. I think they're blown away. I think he'd say he knew I was going to do something. He didn't know what. But every time he's my biggest fan. Every time we open a new location, he's the first one to give a call, shoot a text. So I think, he's very proud and, he's had a huge influence obviously on me and a lot of the lessons he taught me as a kid, I live by today, and I've done my best to kind of integrate into the way that I lead, the way that I manage, and hopefully culturally have instilled, some of those things, in the business and in the team.
Yeah, it's a lot of the people I've interviewed, most specifically the founders, they've said to me, um, they everyone needed some influence to make them know that it's possible to be a founder. Like people would say, I needed, if it was their parents or if it was um, in some community they were in or their friend from college or something where they needed to see someone else do something, start a business, and I think, when you get it at the age that you got it, you're really lucky because you see that and you kind of in your brain you just say, of course it's possible. My dad did it,
Yeah,
like
and David, look, like I'll rewind a little bit, and I think this is a great topic to touch on for a second because I was 27 years old, running an investment team, VP at a finance company, making more money than anyone in my family had ever made times a multiple. I was up for a managing director promotion, which I think people that know in finance, like usually don't get that until you're in your 30s. And I was in my 20s. And I had built the start of a very successful trajectory that could have led me to be the head of a hedge fund or the head of a private equity real estate fund or just a senior member of a team making a lot of cash. And to walk away from that security and safety and relatively certain path to a very different life than I grew up in, to risk it all, I would have never done if it wasn't for exactly what you said, which is seeing my dad go out and risk it all. And there was 2 phone calls I made when I was debating going and doing this or staying the path that I was on in finance. And one was to my father, who said, "Do you believe it will be successful? Do you believe you can be the one to make it successful?" Of which I said yes and yes. He said, "Then you got to do it." And the second was to my eventual co-founder, who was also an entrepreneur, Chris Kelly, dear, dear friend. And he said, "You have to do it." And those were the 2 calls that I made and kind of tipped me over. And, if I hadn't had the upbringing I had had, and if I didn't make those 2 phone calls, I probably wouldn't have done it. It was a lot of money. I don't think my wife still hasn't forgiven me for the amount of money I left on the table, leaving Gramercy 3 months before bonus season. I think she's still bitter about it. But again, life is about calculated risks. I always say growth happens outside of your comfort zone. And, um, thankfully, I did the hardest thing for any founder to do, which is to just walk up to the edge of that cliff and you can't see the bottom and just jump and have faith and confidence that you're going to land.
so you're now, you've got your wife, I think you have 2 kids.
Yeah. My wife, who's an executive, at a hedge fund here in New York, running a real estate finance business. And then we've got 2 children. My son Riley's 10, and my daughter Harley is 6, and she runs the show in the whole house. She's the boss. Little Harley is the boss, and she'll tell you that too. She'll tell you she's the king and the queen in the house.
So do you expose them to the business now? I mean, you mentioned before you reading them the letters and everything, but do you expose them? Do they come to work with you? Do they see the spaces? Do they see you working?
Oh, I bring him to the office. Sometimes on the weekends I'll go be touring neighborhoods to look at spaces from the outside. I'll bring my son with me. I've taken my son on business trips. We just announced a huge deal with Warner Brothers Discovery and Related, and I brought my son to the meeting, um, to listen. So I don't. I expose him, I don't force him, but I think it's important. One of the things I've learned as a leader, and I'd say sometimes managing teams and leading organizations is not that much different than being a parent. One, you have to meet them where they are. You have to flex your style uh, unique to them as individuals. But the most important thing is not what you say, it's what you do. Um, and I think for my kids, leading by example, letting them see and be a part of my day to day when appropriate, I think it's just a great uh, learning opportunity. They may or may not remember it when they're older, but um, I think there's a certain osmosis they're constantly taking in and observing and watching. And, hopefully there's things that they'll take from that experience that they'll be able to use in their life.
Yeah. Yeah. I grew up in a similar situation. I talk about it a lot where my father took me to work with him, took me on trips all over the world, actually in meetings like the one you're talking about, and been all over the place. And at 10, at 11, 15, like all through my life, and got to college, he BCC'd me on all of his emails, like I learned through that same osmosis, and I've tried to do the same with my kids who are 10 and 8. And it's the same thing, like I think it's just being exposed and seeing what is work, at a young age. Most people don't know what work is until they get out of college, maybe get their first internship in college, versus this is what, kind of demystify this is work. It's not rocket science. And, this is how,
Yeah, and what I tell my kids all the time too is, and why I like them to be with me is so much of work is relationships. It's human to human. It's not IQ, it's EQ. It's not technical knowledge. It's, can you ask the right questions? Can you build consensus? Can you get the information you need? Can you collaborate? Can you influence? And why I like having them around is to kind of see and feel that without me having to say it. Because, if I look at my success, it's more that skill set that I've developed than it is my technical knowledge.
if you could go back to the very beginning of your career before you started in finance, your first job, not before you started Convene, all the way back before your first job, and give yourself one piece of advice, given everything that you know today, what would that piece of advice be?
I'd say two. The first is only work with people you like, respect, and trust. Keyword: respect and trust. I believe you are a reflection of the people closest to you. And I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for the mentors and, like, I call it this personal board of advisors that, by the way, it has changed over time, but it has been a staple in my career. And when I was young and just starting out, I think I was too, I don't want to say immature, but I didn't appreciate or understand the importance and value of that until I was a little bit older. And I wish I had made a commitment right away to kind of building that, like, professional personal board of advisors and mentors, like, right away. Um, and then I'd say the second is patience. We live in a world of instant gratification. You look at the success of other founders that, they start their company and 12 months later, they're doing $100 million round at a crazy valuation and they exit. And I think the reality is that is not the norm. And most successful entrepreneurs, family businesses, it's a commitment over a very, very long period of time. I've been doing this for 15 years of my life. I'm 42, almost 43 years old. And I'm just getting started with Convene. And so I think understanding that while time is precious and scarce, success is a long game, not a short game. And kind of trusting the process and being okay that it may take 10, it may take 15, it may take 20, and being willing to kind of continue to put in the work day in, day out, over very long periods of time.
Ryan, thank you very much for doing this. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I could probably talk to you for like 3-4 hours on all kinds of topics, but
Well, let's do that over a martini. We'll schedule dinner for that. We got to get our boy K Burke up to New York. So Kevin, if you listen to this,
he
when
better
you
be
come
listening.
up to New York,
He better be listening.
we're doing dinner. We're doing dinner.
This was awesome, Ryan. Thank you very much.
Oh, David, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot for having me on. I love that you're doing this, and looking forward to getting together.
Awesome. And for everyone listening, hope you enjoyed. I mean, we covered a lot today. I love Ryan's story. Hopefully you do too. Please share it with your networks. And we look forward to seeing you for another episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. That's a wrap for this week's episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, please visit notanotherceopodcast.com. We'll see you next week.